So hello and welcome to Second Home for this very special event with Nesta, Index Ventures and Accenture, and I think one other, the Urban Catapult, Cities Catapult as well. It's a testament to the people behind this event and also I think to the subject matter that Annie Lennox is speaking out there, was 2 minutes ago, and there are 10 times more people in here than listening to Annie Lennox, which I think is pretty amazing so far. Yeah. I think there's never been a more exciting time to be thinking about cities. This, after all, is the first moment in human history that more than half the world's population live in urban areas, and there are so many insights from the fields of technology, behavioral sciences, from data, architecture, that can inform the way that cities are configured to better support the things we all care about: entrepreneurship, innovation, job creation, well-being, and so on. This company, this building, Second Home, is itself, I hope, a small contribution to the debate. We opened last November, and we've tried to think deeply about how the built environment can support well-being and creativity in an entirely new way. One of the examples of that is that those of you at the front of the room are sat underneath a table that weighs 1.5 tons. It hasn't fallen yet, but it's only a matter of time. Every evening it gets lifted up on motorized pulleys, creating this space in the center of the room. And this auditorium, when that table's lifted up, is a civic space. Every event we do here is free and open to the public because we believe, and this is what animates Second Home, that good things happen when different types of people and industry and ideas collide. The cross-pollination between fields is absolutely crucial for innovation and creativity. So that's what Second Home is about. All of you, by being here, help to bring that mission to life, and this event this evening is absolutely no different. We've got a whole set of different conversations to regale you with this evening, and we're going to be kicking off with John Gibson, who's going to be presenting his insights from the reports that you see in front of you. I was lucky enough to work with John for many, many years at Downing Street. He used to do all the work, and I used to get at least some of the glory. And he really is one of the smartest and most insightful people you could ever possibly hear from. So it's a real privilege to have John here. And thank you all again for coming. John, over to you.
So, thanks everybody for coming along tonight. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about CITIE, which is a project that we in Nesta have done with the Accenture High Performance Institute and also with the Future Cities Catapult. And so I should also just say a quick thanks to Ro at Second Home and also to Index Ventures for helping put tonight together. Now, as Ro said, Second Home is kind of a great place to talk about innovation in cities. And in many ways, the kind of stuff that goes on here is indicative of the fact that after a sort of historically anomalous period where innovation was displaced out to big research parks in suburbs, it's now returning rapidly to its natural home in urban centres where different people and different ideas can collide with each other. And in at least a couple of ways, this is a really big opportunity for city governments. First of all, these tech companies create jobs. The London tech sector now has nearly 300,000 people working in it, which is nearly as big as financial services. I think that's about 350,000. And you would expect that it's going to surpass that in the not too distant future. And then secondly, as digital and physical start to come together in interesting ways, we see a whole bunch of new companies emerging, like Citymapper or Uber or One Fine Stay or Airbnb, that change the way that people interact with the world, with cities around them. And if city governments are smart, they can harness this kind of innovation and they can use it to make cities better places to live and to solve urban problems. And so, given all of that, it's no surprise really that city governments around the world are starting to really up the ante in terms of the work that they do to try and cultivate this part of their economy. And so with CITIE, what we're trying to do is to help them do that better. So, CITIE is a guidebook. It's a guidebook that helps policymakers in cities to create the best possible environment for innovation and entrepreneurship. So it sets out a framework that, for designing good policy, and then it assesses the state of the art in 40 global cities. Now, just to clarify, what we're interested in here is not the quantity of startups in any given city, but the quality of the policy environment. And what we're not saying is that government policy can create tech communities. That's just not how the world works at all. But what we are saying is that city governments tend to have a range of levers at their disposal that they can configure to create better or worse conditions for businesses. And our job here is to optimize those conditions. So, I'm going to run you through how we structured our analysis. I'm going to whiz through quite a lot of stuff at a high level, but there's reports on everybody's chairs that contain more detail for anyone who dares. So we started off our analysis by asking 3 questions, and we think these questions characterize the different approach, the kind of approach that a city takes. So, for example, openness. How open is the city to new businesses and to new ideas? Infrastructure. Does the city provide the kind of infrastructure that's necessary for young businesses to grow? And then leadership. To what extent does the city build innovation and entrepreneurship into the way that it conducts its own activities? Now, in order to answer those 3 questions, we defined 9 roles that we think cities need to play well in order to support their local tech communities. So, for example, one of the measures of openness that we use is regulator. And in here, we assess how cities regulate new business models that challenge the status quo, something that's been fairly contentious in the case of companies like Uber and Airbnb in a number of cities recently. Another example, in infrastructure, we look at the role of host, which is how cities help companies find the space that they need and meet the people that they need to meet. Now, the important thing to say about all of these 9 different roles is that they're all constructed to focus on things that are specifically within the control of a city, things that a city can act on, things that a city can be held to account for. We thought that if the objective of this is to talk to policymakers and to help cities do things better, there's no point in measuring things that they can't change. So I'm going to give you a little bit of detail on how we constructed our measures of these different 9 roles by doing a little look under the bonnet of the city as customer, one of the roles. So this is really important stuff. Cities spend an enormous amount of money, about $4.5 trillion globally on goods and services. I think in London it's about £17 billion this year. And so what we measured was a number of different things that get at whether this procurement spend is open and accessible to small businesses, and whether the city uses that procurement to try and pull through new ideas. So, for example, are the opportunities available and visible on a single digital platform that makes it easy for people to access? Does the city have conditions built into its procurement terms that effectively rule out small businesses? For each of our 9 policy roles, we measured a bunch of different things at this level of detail. And I grant you that it's at this level, it's pretty geeky and a little bit dry, but this is the stuff that matters in practice. So when you take all of these 9 roles, you add them together, and you get, for each city, a particular profile that sets out their strengths and weaknesses as a policy agent. So here's London. You can see that in the customer role that we just talked through, it does reasonably well. Slightly less well at 10 o'clock as a digital governor and at 8 o'clock as a connector. But more on London shortly. So we did this analysis for 40 global cities, and that gives you this lovely constellation of different shapes and sizes. This is different cities, all at different stages of development with different strengths and weaknesses. And then we took the data that underpins this analysis and we plugged it all into a fancy website that contains some diagnostic tools, principally aimed at cities, but kind of open to anybody, that allows them to compare how they're doing against cities that they care about. So against cities from the same region as them, or cities that have a similar budget to them, or cities with a similar population, and so on. So that's a quick run-through of how we measured the things we measured. I hope that kind of makes sense to people. I'm now going to try and bring to life this idea of a city playing a number of different roles in relation to businesses by talking you through a story of the relationship between Los Angeles and Waze. So for those of you who don't know, Waze is an app that uses user-generated content about real-time traffic in order to help people find the quickest way home. That's basically how it functions. And I think this particular example illustrates well the kind of different levels on which cities and startups interact with one another. So to start things off, Waze sells data back to cities as a connected cities product. And recently, Los Angeles became a customer of this data, giving Waze business. Now, in order to become a customer like this, the chief technology officer of Los Angeles had to win an internal fight with the LAPD. The LAPD don't like the fact that Waze allows users to flag where police cars are, and so they tried to block the city doing any business with them, but the chief technology officer was able to make the case for the value this would bring to LA and its citizens. And in our strategist role, we describe this kind of way in which strong internal leadership around innovation can help champion this when it comes to the competing priorities of complex organizations like cities. Now, this data that LA buys from Waze, it uses to manage traffic and to do things like spot crimes. And in turn, LA publishes other data about roadworks that Waze uses to feed into its product and to kind of improve it for users. And so we capture this kind of exchange of data in our Datavore role. Now, as Waze expands rapidly in Los Angeles, residents are starting to complain about traffic being rerouted onto quiet suburban roads. So much so, in fact, that a bill was recently proposed to LA City Council that plans to restrict the way that traffic is routed around the city. Now, LA is going to have to figure out how it deals with that. And when it does, it will be acting as a regulator. And then finally, a lot of the material for this little case study comes from a really nice article in this month's New Yorker about Waze, which includes lots of nice quotes about Waze from LA. And by allowing themselves to be quoted in this way, by talking up the value of Waze's product, they're effectively acting as an advocate for it and helping it to win business elsewhere. So there you have a half-completed circle. And this shows the city playing these multiple roles at once in a way that creates mutual benefit for themselves, for the company, in this case Waze, and also for citizens. Now, this game's reasonably easy to play with Waze, given the kind of business that it is. But I think it's important to emphasize that different types of startup will interact with cities in different types of ways, and it's very important right across the board. And so in the report that you have in your chair, we describe a load of examples of this, like Zopa, for example, who were taken by the Mayor of London on his recent trade visit to Boston and New York. And also like, I don't know, Code Academy, who work with Buenos Aires to provide coding skills in local schools and for government workers. So plenty of examples in the report. Take a look. So hopefully that explains how these kind of interactions between cities and startups or tech companies can work in practice. And I'm going to move on now to have a little look at the results of our research. So what you can see here is the full 40 cities that we included in our analysis, arranged into 4 different tiers of performance, with the highest performing cities on the left, the front runners, and then the lowest on the right. And you can see that the lowest have much less full profiles, and they grow as you go left. And there's a couple of things that I just wanted to mention here. The first is that this distribution isn't quite the case of the usual suspects. I mean, if we were just looking at the quantity of startups, you'd expect places like Berlin or Boston or Seattle or Tel Aviv to be right up there. But because we're focusing on the quality of the policy environment, they drop down slightly, and other perhaps less expected cities make it into the top tier. And then the other point I wanted to make about this big spread is that some of the best examples of individual practices that we found in our research live outside the top cities. So, for example, Dubai is spending a fortune promoting local companies to external markets with its Dubai 100 program, and Seoul is building up incredibly impressive capability to use data to optimize their services. And so the message there being, if cities like this can spread the expertise they have in particular fields across different aspects of practice, you'd expect to see them start to move left in this distribution as we repeat the analysis in years to come. So, on to our top 5, our extended podium, so to speak. So, in first place this year was New York City, followed by London, Helsinki, Barcelona, and then Amsterdam. Taken as a group, they provide some quite interesting contrasts. New York and London are obviously big global cities. They've got very well-profiled tech communities. Helsinki, Barcelona, and Amsterdam, much smaller, especially in the case of Barcelona and Amsterdam, slightly less mature tech ecosystems. And these smaller cities are doing some really interesting stuff to get up there towards the top of our charts. Helsinki is probably the most high profile in terms of the existing tech sector, and it's got a lot going on there with its kind of mobile gaming cluster. And it has this mobility on demand strategy, which really stands out as something rather innovative. Barcelona is also in a really interesting place, obviously following the recent elections. It's difficult to predict how that will play out, but it's a mayor with a very different agenda to that which kind of usually prevails in that city. But the thing to really sort of note from Barcelona is that the way they organize their procurement to pull through and act as a first customer for small companies with good ideas is just world-class and kind of well worth copying for any city out there. And then Amsterdam. Slightly further behind, especially Helsinki, in terms of the maturity of its tech ecosystem as things stand. But that's a city that's running really fast. They released a Startup Amsterdam strategy earlier this year, which is full of great stuff like training for coding and sort of city investment funds. And you get the impression that if Amsterdam executes on the things that it's promising at speed, it's going to sort of really stand up as a contender in the near future. So we kind of expect to see growth taking place there. So what is it about New York that stands out and sort of gives them top spot? Well, I think the first thing is they've been pursuing this agenda for longer than most. Bloomberg was obviously a very big champion. And by 2009, they're already running tech accelerators and sort of funding app challenges. So they've got kind of a long-standing pedigree here. The second thing is that over the course of that time, they've organized themselves incredibly well to deliver on this internally. So, for example, they've had an Office of Data Analytics for a few years now, and they've just set up an Office for Technology and Innovation that kind of helps drive this agenda. And then I think the third thing, and sort of the most New York thing about this, is that they do things with a scale of ambition that other cities tend not to. So the great example there being the redevelopment of Roosevelt Island into a gigantic tech campus, something that involved $100 million of public money, $400 million of public land, and just vast amounts of personal energy and charisma on behalf of the mayor's office is like truly impressive and kind of difficult to see happening in many other places in the world. They've obviously had a change of mayor recently. There were fears when Bloomberg left City Hall that the new administration might pay less attention to the tech sector. But I think so far de Blasio's administration is doing pretty well. It's being very supportive. And he's actually being incredibly canny in starting to invest in some of the long-term infrastructure that they need to sort of keep New York at the top. So this is things like STEM skills through the local, I think $80 million of STEM skills through local colleges. And they've committed to introduce universal high-quality broadband and public Wi-Fi. So all of the things that you expect will sort of give them the best chance of staying at the top into the near future. And then I'll end with a parting thought on London. I mean, London's done incredibly well. Second place is laudable, and they're a fairly consistent performer across all of the different areas that we measured. But when you take a step back from the analysis, it's hard not to be left with the impression that other cities are raising the stakes and moving a little bit quicker than London is on a lot of this stuff. So Amsterdam in particular is investing really heavily, and further down our ranking, cities like Seoul and Dubai are putting a lot of effort into this and really prioritizing it from the center. And so I think it's fair to say that if London wants to remain at the top, it's probably going to have to hit the accelerator a little bit. And so my kind of Hapethworth on how to do that. As I mentioned a moment ago, in 2014, New York created an Office of Technology and Innovation and appointed a Chief Technology Officer. And so we've seen across our analysis that it's often moments like this that happen inside a city hall that tend to act as an inflection point. It's when leadership starts to take this area really seriously that cities start to take off. The new Chief Technology Officer of New York described her aim as to make New York City the most tech-friendly and innovation-driven city in the world. Now, I think a good place for London to start would be to form the same office, to appoint a CTO, and to make that single sentence her job description. So that's the end of the analysis, so to speak. We did most of this work by talking to people, and we plan to continue it. So we're going to be talking to a lot of cities over the summer, and we're already starting to think about how we renew and refresh this analysis for 2016. And so I'd love to talk to anybody out there who's interested. And yeah, thank you.